Well, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for joining. My name is Judith Moreno. I am the Administrative Coordinator for the MACE Innovation Research Center. And thank you for coming to our virtual professional speaker series. This is the last one for the semester. And so before we get started, I just want to provide some background on this center and what we do. And so we are dedicated to understanding innovation, the true nature of innovation and how it benefits society. We do this by using an interdisciplinary approach. We examine how innovation advances human potential, productivity, and opportunity. We try to discover the best preconditions for innovation and how it spreads throughout society, as well as understanding the social, economic, and legal barriers to innovation. And so we try to distribute this knowledge broadly to our students or scholars or policymakers and really just the public in general. And the way we do this is through faculty and PhD grants. And so every semester we provide these grants. And if you're interested in knowing more about them, feel free to go to our website. That is mirc.tamu.edu, where you can find more information, and you can also subscribe to our monthly newsletter. And before I introduce our host today, I would like to just quickly announce our signature event for this semester. That is our Bitcoin conference. This is happening on April 16th and 17th. And our speakers include Mr. Ray Dalio from Bridgewater Associates, Tim Draper from Draper Fisher Juvernston, Michael Saylor, Bill Miller, Pete Brigger, Rob Kaplan, among others. And so these are just very, very good speakers that we have for the conference. This will be a 2-day conference, the first one being fully online. And then the second one, we have the option for joining online or joining in person. So if you're interested to know more about this, our information is in our website as well. So mirc.tamu.edu. So feel free to sign up there. It is actually free for A&M students, faculty, staff. So yeah, go to our website to check more about our conferences, our grants, job opportunities, and other events that we have. All right, so with this said, we're ready to get started, and it is my pleasure to introduce the director of the center, Dr. Karok Ray.
I hope all of you do consider coming to our Bitcoin conference, either virtually or in person. It should be a lot of fun, and we're doing a lot about that this semester. So it's my pleasure to introduce Curtis Rogers to our speaker series. Curtis is a Mays alum, actually, so he's one of our own. He graduated in 2004. And he's had, he's one of the things I've always enjoyed about speaking with Curtis is, and I think it's a great idea for all of the new graduates, is that he really carved out an area within transportation, broadly defined, but really about, it seems to me, it's about using marketplace ideas and marketplace technologies in the transportation space. So he was a part of, though this is not on his official bio, I want to call it out. He was a part of Zimride in the early days. He'll tell you a little bit about that. Back between driving carpooling between, say, College Station and Austin. Then he was an early employee at Lyft. Maybe some of you have heard about that company, the 8th employee of Lyft. He worked there for some time. And then when I met him, he was just at the early stages of trying to hack parking and parking spaces. And so we talked about this a few years ago. He worked for or founded a company called Parkade. He'll tell us a little bit about that. And now he is taking over partnerships with Hitch. And he's also part of the Bicycle Advisory Council in Austin, trying to improve urban mobility and movement inside the city of Austin. So we are rebranding our professional speaker series to be less of a lecture, more of an informal conversation. And so we'll have kind of a fireside chat, and then we'll open it up for Q&A towards the end. So Curtis, welcome back to A&M virtually. And one thing I did want to tell you, we are planning, this is probably news to you, but we are planning a conference in the fall on bicycle technology and urban mobility. And so this is actually the first time I'm talking about this conference. There's a professor here at A&M named Jose Bermudez. He is a philosophy professor. He was the dean of the College of Humanities, and he's almost a semi-professional bicycle racer. He's ridden across the United States in 12 days. He's ridden down the Continental Divide, the hardest race in the bicycle world. I think harder than the Tour de France, by himself from Banff, Alberta, all the way down to Mexico on a mountain bike. So he's a real ultra endurance racer, and he knows about bike technology. And we're doing this conference in the fall to focus. It's kind of a niche conference. We want to really be the only people who are focusing on this, on bike innovation and bicycle technology and how that interacts with urban planning. So that's definitely something that maybe you'd be interested in the
You're
fall.
speaking my language, bikes and urban mobility for sure. I mean, like people ask me all the time about driverless cars, and I'm like, no, electric bikes are going to have a bigger impact on something like that. So you're definitely finding a good niche, and I can find plenty of people who are enthusiastic about urban bike mobility to join.
Great, excellent. So why don't we get started, and first tell us a little bit about your journey, if you don't mind, since A&M, and how you got into the kind of the sharing economy, and especially where you are today.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It's a great opportunity. I wish we could all be together on campus, and hopefully that happens in this near future, but this is a great opportunity. Appreciate the chance. It was a weird journey for me, for sure. Growing up in Tyler, Texas, I kind of just had this idea that I was going to have a car for my whole life. I kind of had the idea of you have to get everywhere by driving a car. It's very normal in Tyler, very normal in College Station, and for most of Austin, to be honest. And then after school, I graduated, took a job with Ford Motor Company as my first job, and it was a great experience. And I sort of kind of see the other side of mobility and started to see some shifts occurring. With Ford, we kind of got to see what was happening with the large auto manufacturer and sort of who was buying cars and what the need for cars were at that time. And I just kind of got frustrated with the whole process and started thinking more and more about what if we didn't have to each own our own car to potentially get around? What are the opportunities for mobility? This is all pre-iPhone. This is all pre, what we now know as the digital revolution occurring today, but I could still sense that something was happening primarily around the expansion of Facebook at the time, because like Kuroka and I don't know each other very well, but if we could see each other's Facebook profiles, maybe we could have at least a little bit of comfort in carpooling. And that was really the genesis of it all. I really wanted to find a way to match up with someone else driving from Dallas to Austin. That was sort of what I originally wanted to do. It's like, I've got these empty seats, I can sell them to someone else. It's not hitchhiking, even though it kind of appears to be hitchhiking. It's like I thought Facebook might give us an opportunity to have some kind of a forum that we could actually get some comfort level with riding with each other. That led me down finding this tiny company in California that also had the crazy idea we could jump in a stranger's car and share rides. Fast forward, and that tiny company turned into Lyft, which luckily we pitched this idea of Lyft in the early days of, just get in the car with a stranger, we will background check them, we'll do this. And the opposition was very swift at the beginning. Like people like, no, I'm not doing that. I'm not getting in the car with a stranger. But there were enough people that said, this is interesting. There were enough people that said, our options are so limited. I don't want to rent a car when I visit a city. I don't want to have a car for every trip. This is far better. And so that's really been my journey, is trying to figure out what's crazy enough that not enough people are going to try it, but it's crazy enough that there's enough people that will. And the journey is kind of continuing from that. Since Lyft, sort of, I got to understanding of why people take Lyft and why people use alternatives in transportation. And the main reason is the cost of parking and the cost of each trip of a personal vehicle. So that took me down the path of trying to figure out how can we assign. I have to be careful politically. It's not very popular to say I want to make parking more expensive. Nobody likes to pay for parking. I don't like to pay for parking. But it also showed us that, would you rather pay a little amount for parking and get parking fast, get parking easy, or just do the free for all where everyone has to get parking for free and no one can find parking? So our goal was really to find out a better way of making it easier to take trips, easier to find parking. So Parkade really allows condo buildings, especially now, hopefully apartments soon, where they can easily manage their parking. That's a lot of parking and mobility chatter. That's kind of the fast version of how I got to where I am today. And I didn't choose parking and mobility. They're far more sexy, fun things that you would want to get into for a career, that not parking and not transportation. But that's where the opportunity is today. That's where the opportunity shift is occurring.
That's great. Curtis, when we talked, I think I want to say 2 years ago, you were just at the very beginning of figuring out parking. And can you? What I remember was that you were working with apartment complexes or condos and trying to get the owners to monetize, or is it companies? Like maybe it was corporations also to monetize their parking spots. Was that still what happened? Can you tell us what you did?
Yeah, I think when we probably spoke at that point, we kind of had the three different buckets of where we kind of saw opportunity being residences, companies, and potentially high schools even. Colleges at some point maybe, but the pandemic made commuting non-existent for a while, and it made parking really easy at every single place. So it kind of killed the concept of doing it at companies. So we just doubled down on condo buildings because that's where we had our success. We had more people were visiting friends in condo buildings because they couldn't go to bars, they couldn't go to restaurants. So suddenly the residential experience is really important. So we were able to double down and really create our niche with condo buildings. Just to give you an example of how it would work, if you're going to visit a friend at a condo building, you don't want to have to search for parking on the street. You don't have to worry about parking your car on the street. We allow the resident of that condo building to book a space for you in their own garage from their neighbor. So likely the condo building has sold out all the spaces. If you want to tell your personal story about having a condo with a car in Chicago,
Right.
kind of relates to that, where if you buy a condo, it comes with a parking space.
Right.
And we just said, why not sell that parking space to your neighbors for an hour, for a day? You can monetize it. Don't bother buying a car just because you have an empty parking space. And we've allowed people to quickly monetize that space. They get free money to them. The person that's hosting gets the spot inside the garage for their guests, and everyone wins.
That's great. Oh no, that's a great idea. Kind of like Airbnb for parking spaces.
Exactly.
Yeah, I've owned 2 or 3 condos in my life before my current life in College Station, and for sure. My experience has been when you buy the condo, you have the right to either buy it with a parking spot or without. And it's something like, at least when I was looking at in DC, it was like $30,000 or $50,000 for this parking spot. But then if you say no at the beginning, you never have that parking spot ever. So no one ever says no, even though they don't plan on you having a car. I was living in DC for 8 years. I didn't have a car for 5 of them. And eventually, the only reason I got a car was because I had that parking spot, actually. So I felt like I wasn't using it. So this is great. That's the model. Can you tell us a little bit how the business is going?
Yeah, the business is going great. It's sort of are in this doubling moment where we can double our business every 2 months or so. Working with HOAs has been tough because the timeline of working with HOAs is not really fast. But we've noticed, like, as word keeps spreading about our service, this has been a huge problem for condo buildings. Like, condo buildings, they want to be friendly. They want to be just like in a single family home neighborhood. You can go visit a friend very casually because there's plenty of parking, there's plenty of street parking. It's really easy to visit that person by car. And we want to give that same thing to a condo building. So I can't share any of the specific stats, but we're basically doubling every couple of months as far as launching new buildings, automating a lot of processes within the app and the whole user experience. And we hope to eventually get to expand this to other things, like hopefully, getting into high schools, getting into companies at some point that really want to do something better. The other thing that's changed recently, I'm on the other side of the car spectrum. I bought a Tesla personally. And so now I understand the problem when it comes to needing a charging point. Like, you're going to be going on a trip, you need a place to charge. If you're going from your office somewhere, you're going to need to get a full charge while you're at the office. So the needs for the ability to charge up a car, to have that parking space next to a charger, that's where we see a huge opportunity going forward, because it's going to be so important that we give people peace of mind and confidence they're going to be able to charge their car when they need it. There's this whole concept now of range anxiety, which you'll know if you want a road trip with a Tesla, you really have to have it mapped out as to where you're going to go. And we want to create sort of an environment where we can help out with that as well, where you can find a place to charge when you need to, because that's going to create a whole new spectrum of opportunity around parking lots. And just the concept of a parking lot that we know it today, it's just a free-for-all. You might have a few handicap spaces that are mandated by the government, but other than that, it's just all open parking. Slowly that's changing as we sort of get specific as to who we want to serve with parking spots, whether it's, carpools, whether it's electric vehicle charging, expecting mothers, things like that. We can help provide some order and some management of the chaos that is a parking lot.
Now, back to Parkade. Why do you need to go through the condo building? Why can't it just be purely peer-to-peer, the same way Airbnb is? Tell us. I'm curious about that.
It's a good question. We don't have to go through the building, but in order to create a marketplace, you need to like really get going fast and early. So if you own a condo with a parking spot, sure, you can list it, but who's your audience at that point? You're going to have to do your own marketing to all your neighbors and say, hey, you can rent my parking spot on this. You're going to have to, that's all on you to do. And you're only one person, so you're listing one parking space. When we can go through the management group, which by the way, like once we get in front of them and really explain the product, they really love it, mostly because we keep it within the building. We're a private marketplace, so only the people within the building can buy it. So what happens is we really want to launch with a bang and say we want to have multiple parking spaces listed because a marketplace is going to need supply to be consistent. And then we also can create the demand immediately too. So it's really important on day one that we have a solid marketplace that we can just let it be on autopilot at that point. And we can really give people the ability to watch and see how to price things, how much demand there is, and if they're going to run out of parking. So yeah, long story short, we don't have to go through the management group, but if we want to achieve the goals of having a good, solid marketplace, it really helps to have something from the very get-go on day one.
Great. And let me ask you about pricing. Is pricing automated? Does your system control the pricing? Do you recommend pricing? Users have the ability to pick any pricing they want. Tell us how that works.
It's funny because it is a new marketplace, and most of the places we operate do have pricing on the street. So there is sort of the concept of street parking. That's one of the reasons they want to get a spot within the building so badly. It's because they don't want to pay for parking on the street. We can typically offer significantly cheaper prices than they would be on the street, which is very appealing for everyone. We give them, when you're setting up your parking spot, you can set your own price. They can set it whatever they want. We give them sort of nudges to say like, this is where, 25 cents an hour, 50 cents an hour, $1 an hour. So they can just do a one button click to set a price, which they always like. And then they can also go in and customize the pricing per week and per month. Some people don't want to rent by the hour, but they'd rather rent by the month. So they can set the pricing to do that, or the opposite if they would rather rent by the hour and not have someone locked in on month to month type of parking term.
And these prices are below, you're pricing below the street price?
Yeah, it's really funny because right now, all of these people are getting $0 for their open parking spot.
Right.
So if they can get 50 cents an hour for the parking spot, even if you're in a very expensive marketplace like San Francisco or DC, if you're paying higher street parking prices, like your neighbor who has an open parking spot, they're getting nothing today. So we even have people, if they're wealthy enough, they don't care and they just want to give the parking spot away for free. So they would rather just be a good neighbor and connect with their neighbors that way, and they don't mind giving away the parking spot for free. So that's certainly the fun way to do it. If you're parking like on the roof, you might have a harder time giving it away for free. So there is some special things, like people that have a Tesla charger at their parking spot, they might be able to command a little bit more money if they're actually selling it with the charging capabilities. But it's really an open marketplace. And then once you go through the whole thing, even before you set your own parking spot, you can do a search within your building, see what all your neighbors are charging for parking. So you get an idea of what the marketplace looks like and how much you might be able to get for it.
That's great. I mean, this is, for an economist, this is a dream come true, because you're pricing an underutilized asset and you're allowing for more trade, more people can visit. So I think, from an economic perspective, this is fabulous. It's kind of an example of markets making the world better off. Have you faced some resistance from people on saying that, well, you really shouldn't be pricing parking? Has that been a problem? Tell us about that.
Oh, yeah. I mean, it's really funny, these things that we expect. Everyone thinks that if they buy from Amazon, they should get free shipping. If I'm coming to your business, I'm coming anywhere, I should be provided free parking. And that's fine. But the reality is there is no such thing as free parking. Like, it costs a lot of money to build that garage. It costs a lot of money to maintain everything. So we're simply adding a little fee that doesn't even cover the costs. But as you know, from like marketplaces and economics, like when you add fees to things, it changes behavior. And so that we kind of explain that of like saying, look, we can price things far below street prices. So what happens is if you want to offer it for free, we give you the ability. If someone books your spot for 2 months, that's on you. Like, we really encourage a fee to make sure that the behavior changes there and people aren't like overutilizing this free asset, which is what we kind of see a little bit of now with free parking. You also get some pushback because a lot of times before we enter a condo building, they'll have these environments like a message forum. So you'll have someone post like, hey, I have a friend visiting this weekend. Does anyone have an open parking spot? Maybe they get a response. Maybe they get lucky and someone says, yeah, you can use my spot. So they're kind of used to the option is free. What we give them is the added value of not having to take their chance. You have to roll the dice whenever you send out a mass email to everyone saying, hey, does anyone have a parking spot I can borrow? We let them go in and just in a few clicks, they can actually lock in that. They don't have to interact with anyone. They can just, it's a price that for most people is more valuable than the experience of having to send an email out to the entire building, having to sweat it out, and hope you find a parking spot. So the anxiety around that is enough to get most people to pay a little bit of money for parking. We do have to overcome the idea of paying for parking because when you park in a garage, like in downtown Austin, you're looking at $25 for the night. So we have to go through and say like, no, you have to reset and think of prices as being completely different. You're talking about 50 cents an hour. Maybe there's a daily rate that's like $10 a day or something like that. So it's a price that most people are very comfortable with if we can take away the hassle of finding parking.
That's great. And Curtis, can you tell us what has been some of your influences in the genesis of this concept of pricing parking? Aside from, of course, your education at the Mays Business School, I think you recommended there's a professor at UCLA who was who was that? What were they articulating?
Yeah, Donald Shoup is sort of the godfather of parking policy. He's actually I think he's an economics professor, but he really started looking at real estate early on and sort of noticed that parking is the biggest problem with real estate. Early on in my time with Lyft, the Lyft CEO kind of mentored me a little bit, and he kind of talked about what we're up against when it comes to people sharing rides. And he said, our biggest competition is free parking. And then he gave me Donald Shoup's book, The High Cost of Free Parking, that really explained why we're in this situation we are now. I kind of mentioned before, there's no such thing as free parking. Because if you go anywhere, if you go to lunch somewhere, if you go to a bar somewhere, you're paying for the parking in your food. You're paying for the parking in your drink. And it's not happening on a marketplace. Like we were talking about from the economics of it, that restaurant and that bar didn't put in a parking lot because they thought it would be a good idea. No bar would put in a parking lot and say, we should really provide space for our drinkers to store their vehicles before they drive home. It just doesn't make any sense. Cities require us to build all this parking. All this parking didn't just happen. If you look at an aerial view of a city, it's mostly pavement. That didn't happen by chance. Our cities are actually requiring it. And I'll have to stop talking about this because I'll get furious when I start thinking about it more and more because it's created this environment of driving everywhere. So once I went down that rabbit hole when Logan, the CEO of Lyft, kind of got me started on this, and got me understanding why we have parking everywhere and why the mass amount of parking that we have is really holding back innovation. It's like, why would you do something else if driving is easy? There's a reason Lyft started in San Francisco and not Houston. Houston, it doesn't have the struggle. Houston isn't feeling like the pain of getting around because they're very much designed in an auto-oriented environment. You drive everywhere, driving is easy, parking's easy. It creates this very ugly concrete jungle that we have to deal with there. But there's just a reason. You need sort of that struggle of what kind of problem are you trying to solve? And that'll really push the innovation around that. So I've had the pleasure of talking to Donald Shoup multiple times at this point. He's a rock star within the small niche of parking people that are passionate about parking. And he really is driving a lot of change. We're seeing cities like New York and San Francisco are kind of places that got rid of their parking policies pretty quickly, or more recently, I guess. But they were early on it. But now you're seeing places like Minneapolis, Minnesota, Buffalo, New York, South Bend, Indiana, they're all coming around to saying, like, it doesn't make sense that we make a bar provide parking for their people. It doesn't make sense that we make a downtown condo building have a massive parking garage next to it, because we can get places without cars now. You mentioned e-bikes are huge. Uber and Lyft are huge. You know, walking, like, who knew that old school walking was going to have a comeback during the pandemic? But people are getting around in other ways right now. And one of the crazy things that's actually occurring a lot now too is you have a lot of households going to one car. So when you have two cars sitting in the driveway collecting dust because people are working from home more and they're not going out as much, people sort of recognize that, and they said, you know what, we can get by with one car, and it's far easier. And so I think the city life is getting to be more appealing if you can live in a place where you only have to have one car.
So I want to just make a comment to all the students on the call on the session, that this is a great example of creating a marketplace where there's people obviously have value for something. In this case, it's parking, and it was unpriced before Curtis came into business, and now he's pricing this asset, this resource of the parking spot, and that creates benefits for society because there are now more people are willing to pay for it, and you get more efficient allocation of resources. So this is actually a deep theme in much of the research we do at the center. I just wrote a paper last year, a little more radical on pricing immigration, and you know, something that it's a little controversial, but you know, there's a lot of resistance towards immigration in our country. But if you put a price on it, actually, you could, and we calculated what that price would be. Similar ideas. You could think of this as a way to resolve the excess demand for immigration.
It's a different controversy, but believe me, parking pricing is very controversial.
I believe you. I believe you.
And what I always like to say is, everyone loves free land.
Yeah.
Like, people move, like people like colonize places. People fight wars over land, and we just say, if you buy a car, you get it for free. And so it's a great incentive to buy a car, because you get free land when you buy that car. And if you start talking about putting a price on it, people are going to say, like, this is I signed a contract to purchase a vehicle with the intent that I was going to get to park it for free everywhere. So we're having to change the culture a little bit to say, you don't just get free land everywhere. I mean, Houston has 30 parking spots for every resident. Austin has somewhere around 10 or 11 parking spots for every resident. And it just doesn't make any sense that we're dedicating all this space when it's mostly sitting empty most of the time. So if you're not angering people, if it's not controversial, you're really not going to make that big of a difference. You really know where it's unpopular to do so, and you're going to see an opportunity for big change there.
So I think a place where you might find some allies is among the economic community that is arguing for pricing traffic and pricing infrastructure. And congestion pricing. So this is an old idea in economics, and it's something that we're going to, just to let you know, we're going to address in our conference next year on autonomous driving. We're doing a conference in Dallas in probably it'll be in January or February of 2022, and it's going to be in fact, Abhishek is here. He's on our call. He's a part of the team that's putting that conference together, and we're going to address the future of autonomous driving and to what extent we need to move towards privatizing some of these public assets like roads, so that with a price mechanism, you can use technology to better price traffic.
I'm all about it. I mean, I think that, like I said, with parking, no one wants a new fee added to it, just like no one wants a new fee added to the road. But I think one of the cool things that we've seen in some places is where we have it on Mopac in Austin, where you can take the free lane, or if you want to go faster, you can pay to take the pay lane. And I think it's a great compromise where, like, we're not taking away your ability to get somewhere for free. That still exists, but you're offering price choices to people. And that way it helps fund the road for everyone. So I think, like, you know, you're seeing a lot of stuff, conversations about I-35 right now. For whatever reason, the governor has really said we're not going to do any more toll roads. And everyone's just kind of like, but what if people want to pay?
Right.
Like we're depriving people of the ability to pay for something if they want it, but we're not taking away the free option. And politically, that's what I think is really important. We have to look at saying, like, we're not going to prevent you from going somewhere. Like, if it's a bridge to a place and the only way to get there is by driving there, like, yeah, it's good to have a free option to go there, but it's like, I think we're probably on the same page as far as showing a marketplace and saying, like, if you want to get there faster, we have the ability to pay. So that's really what it's all about.
Are you still planning on working with universities like A&M in terms of solving their parking problems, which we have many?
I would love to. There's different opportunities, different places. One of the things that Parkade really needs is dedicated parking. So you're going to have parking spaces with numbers on them, and like one person owning that parking space.
Yeah.
And that's, I think a lot of universities and a lot of places, even in general, they operate under the idea that if you assign a parking space, you're cutting down the utilization. Because if you have your own parking space at the Mays Business School, it's going to be occupied, what, 30% of the time? Like it's barely going to have any occupancy. And then all of the people looking for parking are going to drive past and they say, oh, there's that professor's open parking spot. I can't park there because he thinks he's special and has this open parking spot. We create the marketplace for that space outside of those times. So if you only have to come to campus one day a week, you can have your assigned parking space and you can make it available for everyone else to use on the days you're not going in. So it's that boosted utilization of the space where we have to change the culture where people think that assigned parking spot doesn't mean underutilized. Assigned parking spot could actually mean better managed and even more utilized than it was before. And if I don't know if A&M would allow you to, sell your parking spot, but you can make it go to the 12th Man Foundation, or you can assign like a nice charity that the Mace Business School is supporting, and have all the money go to that. And then you really create like a fun gamification of it to say, oh, you paid $5 to park in this spot today. Thank you for your donation to whatever charity it is.
Yeah, it's true that most faculty, I can speak on the faculty side, most faculty parking is unassigned, unless you're kind of like dean level, but most faculty is unassigned. But one example of an opportunity maybe for you or your friends is to price office space, because offices are assigned to faculty, and most of the time, especially now, they're underutilized, and so that's another example.
There's a lot of WeWork concepts popping up right now because there's a lot of open, empty parking in via office space. We're not going to touch that one for a while.
Right.
We really like the very basic parking space is just like the turnover is so easy, and there's no terms with code and things like that. So we really appreciate the commodity that is the parking space because it's so basic.
Yeah.
There's not much of a difference between one and the other.
So you mentioned this already a little bit. Let me ask you to speculate more about the effects of the pandemic on the business of Parkade. So you said that you're not pursuing the corporate offices because people aren't even going to work anymore. What other effects are there for the company?
We'll get to offices at some point. It's really just going to take offices are going to have to start understanding that their environmental footprint, how green the company is, includes commuting. Right now, you have a lot of companies like you look at Apple, which is spending millions and millions of dollars to be more environmentally friendly. They'll put solar panels on all their roofs and things like that, because that's how we're judging companies right now on how environmentally friendly you are. Once they start adding how your people are commuting to that factor, then they'll start thinking more about parking policy and how people are getting to the office. We've been able to successfully really double down on condos because that seems to be the niche, and it's far easier to get things going. Once the flywheel is going, you have success in one place and it expands to another place. So we've really been happy with our success in condo buildings. Apartments are going to be there as well, but we think high schools are going to be a huge opportunity as well. You have your juniors and your seniors, they're getting cars and driving. A lot of times they're offering free parking. And like I said before, we don't want to take away the free parking, but we just think you should give kids the opportunity to pay for parking. You can do it through a fundraiser, and high schools, especially private high schools, are always doing fundraisers. So we think there's going to be cool opportunities where we can actually contribute towards the school or some nonprofit that they want to support, and giving them something of value. If we've actually been able to see, like on Google Maps, you can sometimes notice which high schools are actually letting the students paint their parking spots. That's kind of a way we can kind of see, oh, that school is kind of doing something interesting, like they might be assigning the parking spaces. And some have already gotten into it, whereas we can understand like how the economics are working and if they're willing to do something.
Awesome. Tell us a little bit about Hitch, what you're doing with Hitch.
Yeah, so Hitch is sort of continuing the unfinished business of Zimride. I kind of got connected with them recently, and it's really exciting. Hitch is really coordinating rides between cities like the original Zimride concept was. They're going at it from a different way of starting off with more of a professional option, whereas they'll give you more of an experience that, if you can think about it, like carpooling was very informal, especially with Lyft in the early days. Uber sort of kicked things off with using a black car experience. If you traveled to a big city around 2011, the only option was to get an Uber black car, which is great for executives. It's great for the people they're hosting or traveling for business. You know, they like that black car experience. And Lyft kind of sort of took advantage of the fact that most people didn't need that. And they were looking for something that was just more basic, and we could expand Lyft to other places. And then obviously Uber X did the same thing. Hitch is sort of going after the same group and saying, if you want to get between cities, the nice thing that they have now is Hitch knows you don't need a car once you get to Austin. There's a lot of places in Austin you don't want a car once you get here. So the car is actually more of a bug than a feature when you get to a city now. So you don't actually want to have your car with you. You have to pay for parking and try to figure that all out. So they're kind of recognizing the ability to do that and sort of get around. The nice thing as well, I think it's going to be good to go after colleges. Going back to your question about how do we help A&M with their parking, you know, if you're going to A&M as a freshman, if you're living on campus, if you bring a car, that car is going to collect dust most of the time. Maybe you're going to take some off-campus trips a few times a week. You're going to drive home on the weekends, but for the most part, you're not going to use your car that much. And I've talked to the parking department there, and they're really frustrated because they have to give these kids parking, even though they would rather have that parking available for staff, have that parking available for people that are coming in and out. And so from that perspective is Uber and Lyft can provide the trips they need in town, those few times a week if they're living on campus. Hitch can provide the rides they need back home on the weekends. And they can do it for far lower price. When we're talking about the cost of college is definitely a burden on a lot of households. Why don't you just don't take a car to college? Then you can cut out 10 grand a year in the amount that you're going to need to supply that student with a car. We're not saying you shouldn't bring a car to college. We're just saying if you don't have to, why burden yourself with that cost of taking a car to college?
Is the Hitch model similar to Uber and Lyft, or is it structurally different?
It's structurally different only because you're more scheduling a ride. They are obviously like looking to do it on more of an on-demand basis compared to what it used to be. But it is more of a process of scheduling a ride, and it is more personal. I mean, the Hitch concept is really, think of it as like replacing, you know, your airplane rides or your megabus rides from city to city, versus Lyft and Uber, you're more replacing your personal car trips. Or if you're traveling to a new city with, you know, if you're flying somewhere, you can avoid renting a car because of Uber and Lyft. This is more so replacing that short trip. If you're driving or if you're flying from, you know, Austin to Dallas, if you live in Round Rock, you have to drive south to get to the airport, and then you have to fly north to get to Dallas. Well, if you just took off from your house, then you'd be halfway there by the time the plane takes off. So it's sort of utilizing these shorter trips that really don't make a lot of sense to do by plane. And we can offer a different experience now, going back to like how COVID is affecting things. You know, like I've been on a plane recently. It's just not a fun experience with the amount of people they pack in a plane. Everyone has to wear a mask. There's no food service and all those things. You know, the ground transportation really sees an opportunity now where they can provide a different experience with no crowding, door-to-door experience. It could be a lot faster.
What was Zimride? Zimride was a little closer to carpooling, right? Rather than paying for transportation. Is that right?
Yeah, the biggest difference, which Hitch is sort of addressing, is Zimride was pure peer-to-peer.
Right.
Zimride was basically, I'm driving from Austin to College Station. I've got 3 open seats in my car. Who wants a ride? And we very much utilized Facebook. So you could see my Facebook profile. You could see that I was actually a real person. I could tag my school so they could see like, oh, this person went to A&M. You know, there's a little level of trust with that comes around.
And you would agree to like split gas or something?
The person could set their own price. So we're also creating a marketplace.
Okay.
It was interesting going back to like the how do you price it conversation. we have a big culture in the United States of just paying for gas. Like if I'm giving you a ride, then you really should only be covering the gas. That's not the case. Now that I have an electric car, like you're going to pay me for more than the electricity. So sort of like, it's sort of saying like, how much is this ride actually worth? Not just thinking about the variable cost of gasoline as the only expense of the trip. Whereas Hitch now, because they're providing more of a professional service, they're able to raise the price on that because they're saying, rather than think of it as, oh, I'm already going that way, I should only pay for your gas. Hitch is now offering sort of a more professional service that's closer, comparing it to an airplane flight, which you're normally going to pay 100, 150 bucks for. So they're able to get a higher price point for that because it's just more of a professional experience.
But it sounds like no one has continued on this kind of working through the social graph as Zimride was, with where the experience is more than just pure transportation. It might be you want to meet some friends or have a conversation over 3 hours.
Yeah, Hitch is going to get there for sure. I think that we noticed with Zimride that San Francisco to Los Angeles was just too far to ride with someone in the car. I took a Zimride from LA to San Francisco in 2012 or 13, and it was fine. There's nothing wrong with the ride. It was just 6.5 hours in the car with the stranger. It's just too far. And I'm sure some people enjoyed it more than I did. And it was a great experience. I was really happy that we had that option. But the Texas trips offer a better range, which from Houston to Austin is like 2.5 hours or so. So you're really talking about far less of a commitment to ride in the car with a stranger. And then and we do want to get to that peer-to-peer situation where it's just like jump in a car with a person. Undergrads and graduate students are far more likely to do something like that. We actually saw that, which maybe it's not news to you, but a lot of graduate students like live in Houston. And so they would come into College Station for a couple of days a week and they would do Zimride to take undergrads back and forth from Houston. So we do see a peer-to-peer opportunity, especially with college campuses, but it's also important to have that sort of more first-class experience so you have the ability to offer rides to other people and sort of create the marketplace that way.
Well, you'll need to find a way to integrate this into a dating app because then that could be the first date, that long ride.
You know, Zimride actually had some successful relationships that formed. So.
I bet. I believe it. I mean, I remember a long time ago, I wanted to go on a first date with someone and I proposed flying to Morocco as the plane flight would be the date. And she said, no, I don't know you enough. I'm not going to do that. Fortunately, she married me anyway. So, so she's now my wife.
That's one way to kick things off and say, like, let's just not even think about sort of the small talk.
Yeah. Yeah. Tell us what you're doing with the Bicycle Coalition in Austin.
Yeah, it was interesting. When I got to Austin, it was sort of this very pivotal moment when scooters were being launched here. And everyone, if you visit a city, you see scooters everywhere. And so I got involved with that a little bit because cities were very hesitant to allow scooters in. And it annoyed me only because people kept talking about the dangers of these scooters. I kept saying, well, cars kill 40,000 people a year in the United States. Like, if we're going to talk about the danger of transportation, why are we singling out scooters when cars are actually far more dangerous? And so it kind of got me interested in some of the policy stuff around the city of Austin. And I'm not endorsing everyone jump on a scooter because they can be dangerous. But in the reality of it all, like when I talk about Uber and Lyft and Hitch and Zimride and all these things, they're all part of the puzzle of helping someone not have to own a car, or maybe helping a household only have to own one car. So if you can get around by bicycle more easily, if you get around by walking more easily, scooters are just one more piece of that. And they've sort of fallen under the bicycle bucket when it comes to policy at a place like Austin. So I really wanted to get into sort of understanding how cities work a little bit more and understanding how we can ask them better questions around what are we doing to support things. Austin still has parking requirements for most of the city. So one of my goals now is to get rid of parking requirements in Austin. And when I say that, I should probably rephrase it. It's basically I want to get rid of the fact that Austin forces a home to have a certain number of parking spots. Austin forces a business to have a certain number of parking spots. College Station likely does the same thing. I'm not really sure. Houston is famous for having no zoning, but they still require parking for a lot of places. So the goal now is to get Austin to stop subsidizing car trips with free parking and just help people understand, like, if we can drop the parking requirements, we can build more housing. we can make it easier for people to get around in other ways. So that's sort of the goal now is we can only do so much to encourage bike riding. We have to put bike riding on a level playing field with driving if we really want to see significant change.
And are you, is that the area I think you feel like the most change will happen in the future is you said electric bikes at the beginning. Is that what you think the future is in terms of urban mobility?
Yeah, the low-hanging fruit really is electric bikes and getting people to consider other modes. Once you use an electric bike, you realize the power, no pun intended, that it would have, which is just basically like in a place like San Francisco and Austin has a few hills, obviously. When you get on an electric bike, it feels closer to a moped or a motorcycle, honestly, than it does to a bicycle.
Yeah.
And the minimal regulation around it, you don't have to register these things. You need a safe place to put it, which is why bike parking in your home garage or at your office is going to be very important. So it's important that we sort of start transitioning our parking supply to support things like electric bikes, because that is going to be really important. But once you ride on an electric bike, you realize this is a different machine than what you're used to for a bicycle. There's the very basic things are basically making electric bikes more common. The federal government right now is looking at subsidizing this. So they're looking at some tax credits they might do with electric bikes, because we've been doing tax credits for electric cars for a long time. So they're looking to expand that to electric bikes, which would be really big. And then, like I said before, changing the policy so the city government doesn't force a business to provide a certain amount of parking spots or force a home to have a certain number of parking spots. Those are the two biggest things I think we need to focus on, is expanding electric bike access, expanding, good bike routes, and then also just like getting government out of the parking business.
Yeah. Yeah, just some history with A&M. We had I actually proposed to the Parking and Transportation Division, we need electric bikes between, for example, Wayner and Zachary, the business and engineer. I mean, it's far enough that no one wants to walk that distance.
Yep.
And a lot of the times you don't want to physically bike it. You just want an electric bike.
Yep.
And what happened was I did propose it. They were open to it, but the university kind of had a bad taste in their mouth from the bike sharing experience they had 2 years ago when the bikes were all over the place and there was a big mess, and the alumni are like, oh, our pretty campus is now unfortunately littered with all these ugly yellow and blue bikes, the OFO bikes. And so they didn't take me up on that offer.
Yeah, it was kind of a tough way to learn. It was definitely, I think that you should still keep pursuing it. There's something there for sure.
Yeah.
And people won't deploy electric bikes the same way they did with those cheap OFO bikes. The bikes, because the bikes are more expensive, you're not going to deploy that without a very secure way to store the bike in a very particular place. In your case, it would make a lot of sense to take away a little bit of space. There's probably some dead space on a sidewalk somewhere, or even like a couple parking spots. It wouldn't kill them to forego a parking spot to put a smart bike rack that actually you could park it. The technology is getting better now, where when you park an electric bike, it could actually start charging the electric bike as well.
Yeah.
So there's really cool stuff. Like the OFO experience that y'all had with colorful bikes all over the place, that was a learning experience for sure. But I do think that once you start riding on an electric bike, you realize the potential.
Yeah, and I think college campuses is a great place to start. They're big enough, they feel like cities, and then you can get people used to using them by the time they graduate.
Exactly.
Okay, let me open it up to questions. If anyone has any questions, again, you don't even have to write it out. You can just unmute yourself and start talking if that works.
I'll go if nobody else does. Thank you, Curtis, so much for taking the time. I'm in the marketing department here at Maze. And I think in my mind, before we worry about bringing them to campus, and of course it would be great to have electric bikes on campus and all that, it seems so hard to change the culture here to get the local government to build the bike paths. I mean, they've started doing some in College Station, but from my house to campus, I don't feel safe I mean, there are some bike paths, but I wouldn't feel safe. I still have to cross the freeway and so on and so forth. So what can be done? It seems to me that that's the place to start. In order for people to start thinking about them as modes of transportation, there has to be a safe space to utilize them. What can it be done to convince local governments? Are there places, success stories that we can use to just give as examples?
Yeah, I mean, bike lanes are certainly controversial whenever you want to propose them. There's going to be some people that are for and against. It's a tough one for sure. And, you know, we're likely not going to get bike lanes on every street. I mean, I love Amsterdam, and I think they have a great culture there. But it's a long way to go from there. I think the most important thing right now is to look for the places where people are trying to bike and it just doesn't look. People look for the places that people are riding bikes on the sidewalk because there is no bike lane, and pointing to that and say, like, look, if people are willing to do this, this is clearly a good route that we have some capacity where we have some demand for biking in this location, and people are willing to do it. It might be a little dangerous, unfortunately, but I think there's an opportunity with that. You should also bring up, like, in those cases, like, it might not be the route to your house, but if you support another bike lane somewhere else that might have a little more community support that one, and then it'll eventually grow to your neighborhood as well. There's also an equity. Last thing I'll say is there's an equity play there as well. You know, right now in Austin, we really promote what we call all ages and abilities biking, and I highlight a lot that there are a lot of places that I feel comfortable biking, but women or younger people or older people do not feel comfortable biking. So I think that we have to build bike lanes in a way and say, like, look, if we really want to make a play on equity and say, like, if we want the whole city to change, we have to build a bike environment that everyone feels comfortable. And it's just a moment. I'm just kind of saying, like, take advantage of the fact that we're really trying to do things more fair right now between genders and ages and things like that.
That's actually a great point, something that I really haven't thought about, but it makes a lot of sense. Our city had a survey, I want to say maybe 2-3 years ago, where they asked us what we want. And I kind of ranked the bike paths the higher. I know my husband did because he grew up in Montreal, where there were way more bike paths than we have here. I think they came in dead last. I was so disappointed. I was like, dang, okay, there's just no. And again, I mean, they're starting to appear, but I feel that unless we make some progress there, it's just going to be tough.
Yeah, I would say that, you know, going back to the parking discussion, if, you know, a lot of times college campuses sell parking passes like all you can eat buffets. You buy a parking pass for the month, for the semester, or maybe for the entire year. That just encourages you to drive more because you made the down payment on the parking. So what we really need, if you want to make one big change with A&M, is have them consider switching some of their lots to be daily lots and then shifting over to the daily decision of how am I going to get to campus. You're not taking away their ability to drive. You're just saying, like, if it's a beautiful day, and I've heard from Dr. Ray and others, like, that College Station actually does have a lot of traffic during certain times of the day pre-pandemic. If you see a bike, especially an electric bike, going by you in traffic, it's like time and money are going to be the biggest things that change our culture and change our attitude towards alternatives. And there's no better feeling. I had a Vespa scooter when I lived in San Francisco. There was no better feeling than going between the cars when they were all parked, stuck in traffic. So I would highly recommend, you know, sort of looking for creative ways. And I'll add one last thing, which is I always love to call out UT Austin for they rank lower than A&M does in biking like infrastructure. So A&M might not be, in College Station as a whole, might not be Amsterdam, but Austin and around UT is actually worse. So if you think like College Station can never get there, well, it's taking Austin a lot longer to get better infrastructure than A&M has.
That's another argument that we can use. How long can we let UT be ahead of us on that dimension? So
y'all are ahead of UT now. If UT passes you, then you could definitely get there.
Yeah.
Thank you.
What price point do you think the electric bikes need to sit at? Because I used to be a salesman for Specialized, and like their cheapest one is some 2,500 bucks. And I'm a student at the Galveston campus, and a lot of us are switching over to those cheap eBay motor kits that you just pop in a pre-existing bike that you already have,
Mhm.
and those are less than 150 bucks. And yeah, they're annoying to listen to, but like that's 150 bucks is hard to beat for an electric bike.
Yeah, it's a good question. I think the tax incentives that they're pitching are really good. Not only are the tax incentives that there's a congressman out of Oregon that's sort of like the biggest bike advocate we have in Congress, and he's really pushing this hard to bring e-bikes into the tax advantage we've given to electric cars for a while. Not while the advantage for that is going to be obviously financial, it's going to be a huge marketing opportunity for electric bikes, because when you're filling out doing your turbo tax every year and it says like, did you buy an electric bike this year, that's going to nudge a lot of people and say, oh, I didn't realize there's a tax advantage to this. It's going to be a huge marketing opportunity, where I think that we'll also from that see more scale in electric bikes. And I mean, I've always said that people like to hate on Elon Musk a lot for putting out as many cars as he does. But I'm just like, Elon would create bikes if we build for bikes. If we build a lot of good bike lanes, if we put tax breaks on bikes, the manufacturers are going to start doing it. So I think we are going to see the prices start to drop. We are going to see in the early days, it will be not really sort of the people's option. But if you look at things like the iPhone, when the iPhone came out, it was only the rich people had it at first. And then when technology, like we always say, like wealth doesn't trickle down, Reagan economics, technology does. And technology does have the ability to trickle down once people recognize there's a great advantage to technology. They recognize that, if we can get this at a price point for the masses, not only does the society improve, but the business can make money on it as well. So I think that while I understand that right now, 2,500 bucks or whatever the price points are for these really great electric bikes is pretty high, this is just the early days. I think of like this is the iPhone in year one, when it really takes a lot of people buying it early, spending the money to do it, and then you show your neighbor your phone, or you show your neighbor your electric bike and have them ride on it. And the last thing I'll add is, while expensive, electric bikes are a lot cheaper than cars. And when you have a household that has two adults, they have two cars, and they're considering dropping to one car, they can say, oh, but we can buy that electric bike and use Lyft and Uber and all the other alternatives. Suddenly electric bikes are a lot cheaper if you can replace a car, which I know a lot of people can't, but the number of people that can is growing.
Okay.
Curtis,
is kind of being, go ahead.
Go ahead, man.
Do you see it as being like an exponential growth? Like say next 5 years, as you're saying, like there's going to be a lot of people swapping over to it, or do you see it as a slow growth?
Unfortunately, I see it as a slow growth for different reasons. Right now, the Trump tax cut, the tax cuts that occurred in the Trump administration, they actually took away the ability for an employer to pay for a bike commuter. So that's another thing they're trying to do right now. You'll notice like culture doesn't change quickly, but if you put prices on things, then it'll definitely change faster. So a couple things: if we change our parking policies to be more of a daily decision, and then if we change our tax code to allow employers to support people who ride bikes to work, that would be really big. This gets really wonky and boring. Like the topics of tax and parking, like if you really want to lose an audience, like that's a really topic to bring up. But those are things that drive decisions. Those are things that drive commute decisions. Those are things that really influence how we get around. And so we're not going to see much progress until those things change. So to answer your question, it's going to be a slow change unless we make some really big shifts when it comes to tax policy and city planning policy.
Yeah, so we're waiting for the infrastructure just to support it better, and then it's going to happen. I got you.
Yeah, I mean, talk to any parents though that get electric bikes, and they'll rave about them. Like you see people riding in Boston, you can put two kids on the back of some of these electric bikes, and they just look really fun. So I think that among these parent groups, when they connect the marketing that is occurring at playgrounds and at schools when people are showing up on electric bikes is really powerful.
Okay.
Well, Curtis, we are out of time. I wanted to thank you for taking the time to speak with us. And what I'll do is I think we'll close the official session. If anyone wants to stay on and ask you specific questions, just like as if this was a normal visit, it's up to you if you want to stick around and answer those questions.
Yeah, I can hang around.
Okay, so if any of you have any specific questions for Curtis, please feel free to ask him. But otherwise, you're free to disband if whoever wants to.
Thank you.
How do you see like autonomous driving? Autonomous driving is coming in pretty hot to the market. I just finished a study on Tesla for my strategic management class, and it seems like in the next 10 years, there's not going to be too many drivers, of course. So do you see this as you're saying that people don't want to take 3-4 hour trips with another person in the car? How do you see this helping Hitch and other things like that? I guess what I'm trying to ask is, do you see that being an exploding market? Do you like once this is a thing, there's going to be competition for Hitch that's going to be growing, or
Yeah, a couple points. I think that autonomous driving is going to help Hitch, helps Uber likely. I think that if you've ever talked to anyone that works around this technology, autonomous driving in cities, there are so many variables in cities to have to consider. It's really hard, and the lingo, which if you studied it, you might know, is like level 5. Autonomous is like no steering wheel. Right. It's literally built for a driver can never take over. And I think that for some of the longer trips, like when I'm in my Tesla on the highway, especially if I'm sitting in traffic on I-35, I can easily flip it into autonomous mode and enjoy it. Now it's going at a very slow speed. The only variables is it has to stay behind the car in front of me and it has to stay between the lanes. That's a really easy, it's a really easy problem to solve with the technology we have today. Autonomous, I'm not making any plans for autonomous. Like it's so hard. And talking to my friends that have worked on autonomous technology, it's always 2 years away. Like it's this rolling goal that we're going to start calling driverless taxis in 2 years, and it just keeps getting extended every single time. It's going to be really hard. And the other thing they'll say is, people often talk about how if people are going to take autonomous cars when they come out. Well, why would you take an autonomous car instead of drive yourself if the pricing doesn't really change that much compared to Uber today? I really fail to see how we're going to be able to make this a lot cheaper than what exists today with Uber and Lyft. If you just look at the economics of it, they're going to be supplying a commercial vehicle loaded with technology. They're going to be paying commercial registration. They're going to be paying commercial insurance. Even if it's electric, like, you have to charge it. Tires are still going to cost something.
Yeah, your maintenance costs.
Yeah, without a price on parking, I don't really see why people would not just continue driving their own personal cars. I don't see why they would take an autonomous vehicle if they're not using Uber today.
Okay, I got you. I guess that's it for me, man. I appreciate your input.
Yeah, thanks for the questions.
All right. Anyone else has any other questions? Okay, I guess we'll end it here then. Thank you so much, Curtis, for your time. I will be sending out the link to the recorded session tomorrow afternoon.
Great. Thanks so much. Appreciate you all.
Awesome. Thank you. Have a good rest of your day.